Broad-based policy uncertainty has caused havoc within the South African mining sector, and it certainly has caused trouble in the agricultural sector too. Investors holding back in the agricultural sector, the uncertainty around land reform, a big issue. The Banking Association says it's seen a decline in the number of farm transactions over the last year or so. I'm taking stock with the Land Bank Chief Executive TP Nchocho, who joins us in studio this evening. Are we seeing farmers be as risk-averse as people buying and selling agricultural land? Farmers, if they're expecting a drought, might plant less, or they might leave a bigger gap between the plants or bigger gap between the rows in order to maximise the moisture in the soil. Very few times will they not plant at all, because if you miss the planting season, your lands lie fallow and you miss out on a whole year of revenue. Are we seeing normal fertiliser buying patterns? Are we seeing normal seed buying patterns? Because that tells us how farmers are feeling about the risks of land reform.
There are two indicators that we are looking at the moment, Bruce. One is sales on movable equipment such as tractors and harvesters and things like those that farmers need for farming. And
these are big ticket items. I mean, you don't get much change out of R1 million for a tractor, and you don't get much change out of 7 to 10 million rand for a combine harvester. So.
And so the numbers that we have in the office is that the numbers are steady. They are not declining. They are steady. They are marginally up. What is still outstanding as a statistic is the actual drawdown on the production facilities, the working capital that on a cyclical basis farmers draw from our facilities in order to put into the ground, to buy fertilizers and seeds.
People think that farming is massively profitable and you use some of last year's profit to put into the land this year, but farming traditionally anyway is a debt-driven business. You take on debt at the beginning of the season and hopefully you pay it back at the end of the year.
It works in cycles like that. You raise your working capital facilities at the beginning of the planting season, you put them into the ground, so to speak, and you pay back your facilities at the end of the season. So we are sure that the season last year was good as reported by the various committees on crop estimates, and that the servicing of our debt exposures is okay and should continue to be okay. The point that I was making was that the season in terms of drawing funds in order to plant, we really will know around the end of December, Bruce, exactly what the numbers are like. But as you point out, leaving your land unattended to is in itself problematic.
And that raises the risk then of the rhetoric around land reform and the land redistribution, because what the President has said very clearly is productive farmland must not be messed with. We've seen the Zimbabwe experience and nobody wants to go down that route. And Tito Mboweni, last week's medium-term budget policy statement and the press conferences around the various issues that came up, also very clear, agricultural land, productive agricultural land must not be messed with. It doesn't mean it can't be tinkered with, it doesn't mean that it can't be transformed from a political perspective, but you mess with commercial agriculture, you mess with food security, you mess with the livelihood of a nation.
You know, Bruce, what is interesting about this entire discussion around expropriation and or land reform is that there is across-the-board agreement that land reform has to be undertaken in order to promote greater inclusivity and achieve social transformation and economic empowerment. Absolutely, I haven't heard anyone vehemently opposed to that. What seems to be thorny is the how part of it, and this suggestion about expropriation and so on and so on.
That's the political, emotive side of this, and it's perfectly understandable. One goes back to even before the 1913 Land Act, but the 1913 Land Act formalised dispossession. And that created a process, and then things were fallow for a while, and then the 60s and group areas and everything else simply entrenched that then within urban areas too, and we then saw the widespread dispossession. It's no wonder that people in South Africa feel as if they are second-class citizens without access to the means of production, to quote Karl Marx.
You know, until I read that book by Advocate Nchocho, I didn't understand the depth to which legislation in the late 1890s and in the early part of the 1990s was used for dispossession. So that one is an undisputable part of our history as a nation. Fast forward to today, the question is what needs to be done? And in our proposition as the Land Bank, and this is a suggestion that we made in our submission to the review committee, was that, yes, whatever dispensation is agreed to in terms of either amending or not amending the Constitution and or improving the land expropriation bill in order to create an greater enablement for the state to fast-track the process. Whatever dispensation is agreed, the crucial variable is to strengthen those institutions that will be crucial for supporting the new participants, the black farmers, emerging farmers, or whatever term we want to call them, who will be entering the sector. They need support, and you need a better institutional ecosystem.
It's a bit like going for your first parachute jump and not being given the parachute. So it's all well and good. You can be taught the theory of the ground.
That's a good analogy.
And when you then launch out of the aeroplane, if you have no parachute in your back, you are going to fall to your death. You do that to farmers, figuratively speaking, and you set people up for failure all over again.
Correct. That is why, as part of the funding that was alluded to in the budget yesterday, the basic proposition that has been made and we have discussed between ourselves, the Land Bank, as well as the National Treasury and the sector departments of land reform and agriculture, is the increased use of this so-called blended financing mechanisms, where it is not viable to load a new enterprise with 100% debt at inception. So, whether we like it or not, when we do the numbers, somebody can come and ask for a loan of 20 million. We do our feasibility assessment and we make a determination and say prudential levels of debt service dictate that the maximum loan that we can provide to you, Bruce, as a black person, is 12 million. Then the other 8 million has to come from somewhere. And that is blended financing. And that is where it has been agreed, and we have signed a framework for implementing this, where grants appropriated through the Department of Land Reform and the Department of Agriculture would be meshed with debt so that you achieve prudential levels.
Why is it important for farmers, for new farmers, to have debt? Why not just hand over the land? Why not just do a transfer of assets? Why not just say, you want a farm? Here's a farm. Well, you got to. I mean, it's about the risk and reward ratio, I suspect.
Yeah, I'm referring here to a situation where you need capital investment on your farm. Yeah. So what happens is that the state can acquire a piece of land for to redistribute under the land reform program, but you still have to build irrigation systems. You still have to build storage facilities on the farms, whatever capital equipment that you need for farming, energy infrastructure.
And this can go into the millions and tens of millions of rand, depending on the scale of operations.
Precisely.
There are some very interesting models in South Africa, and I think Tito Boweni was referring last week to ZZ2. This is Tommy van Sail in Limpopo.
Yes.
They do some really interesting things there. Is that a model for the future? We'll talk about that in terms of the cooperation between established farmers and new farmers, the ability to provide land and then to provide the skills, the resources, the training, and the gradual independence of people who are, if not given the correct sort of grounding in agriculture, run the risk of crashing and burning. More on that in a moment.